All right, transitioning from home program to IEP program at school. So I'm just throwing this in there because some of you are working in early elementary where you're receiving kids into kindergarten, grade 1, and they might be coming from an intensive home program. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and kind of how it relates to the expectations that people might have, just so everyone's kind of sensitive to other people's perspectives. So here's what families are experiencing when they transition from their home-based early intervention behavior program to the school program. And by the way, the home program probably has speech-language pathology, weekly or consultation, occupational therapy, and other professionals working as well. So at home, complete control. Right? The parents interview, they hire, they fire, they give raises at their discretion. Right? They control the teachers for their kids. Right? There's a huge amount of control and power that comes from that. And as soon as they go to school, from the parents' perspective, there's a relative loss or lack of control. I don't know who the SEA will be. I don't know how many there will be. I don't know if they'll be with him or her the whole time. I don't know necessarily if the SEA is sick and there's a sub, whereas in my house, I know all of these things, right? So there's this loss of control. And I think it's something for us on the school end of things to be sensitive to as parents are coming in. And it's not about, the sensitivity will help us be more compassionate as opposed to, why is this person being so demanding, right? It's a matter of, well, here's what they've had, and now we need to segue them into the school. They've had bi-weekly or monthly team meetings. Some of my colleagues, the way they set up their home therapy practices is the entire therapy team gets together every 2 weeks, and they go over every program and progress or lack of progress, and they make changes every 2 weeks. Intensive, highly accountable, very expensive, right? Not everyone can do that. I think it's probably more of a common practice and more financially pragmatic that people have monthly team meetings. Most of the clients I work with, the whole team gets together for an hour or two once a month. It's like having an IEP meeting every month. Right? And so parents are used to that degree of accountability and reporting and involvement in their living room. Right? And then they go to school and there's infrequent meetings. Right? There might be a meeting in September or October, maybe November, and there might not be another meeting till the end of the year. Maybe there's just one meeting. Right? There's a huge variability school by school and district by district in how often they have meetings. And I won't comment or criticize any of those because those are unique variables to the schools and the resources available to them. But compared to what's happening at home, it's infrequent. At home, they have a clear program, clear methods, and clear data for accountability, right? There's a program list. So these are the 12 teaching programs we're working on. And here's a written procedure for how you deliver the learn units for each of these 12 programs. And here's the data the BIs are collecting. And we look at that every month or more often. And then they go to school and it might be less well-defined. They don't know exactly what the program is. They might not be clear on the methods. They're not there, they don't get to see it. And there isn't the data that they're used to. The reporting of it tends to be more anecdotal and infrequent. And there's others. Anyone want to add to that list? No one wants to talk in front of 75 people? Okay, that's fine. I think that's fairly all-encompassing, right? And so I'm just putting that there not as a criticism from either, but just so each party is understanding what the transition looks like and why there can be some anxiety around that. So in other words, parents have made a significant investment in their child's intervention program. They've been paying for this and doing the work of hosting it in their home. Parents are continuing to make a significant investment, probably because there's a continuing home program. Parents want to see a smooth transition into the school program. They want to see their investment continued. So what some people will have is this idea that what we're doing at home will move wholesale into the school and you'll do exactly at school what we do at home. And in some cases that happens. In many other cases that doesn't happen. It's not appropriate for that to happen. And so this really needs to be managed in terms of communication from both ends so that schools understand that parents might have this idea. Parents have the understanding that this might not be doable in the school, and in many cases it might not be advisable for their child to just be doing a home therapy basically in another building. Parents have very high expectations of the IEP and implementation given their history and investment and involvement at home. Right? And so I've had this comment from schools that I work with because I work as a consultant to schools. In some cases I work directly for the schools, so I'm an insider, outsider. I can appreciate all the perspectives. And sometimes I'll hear on the inside, this parent's really demanding, like they're being unreasonable. I say, well, as a behavior analyst, I don't mentalize it. I think, well, what are the contingencies around that behavior? What's their motivation? Right? I can analyze why. It's because this is their reinforcement history. And now this is something very different. And there's incongruity here. And that's why they seem to be demanding. We just need to manage expectations to meet the child's needs first and foremost, and then everyone else's. Okay? So that's just a little bit on the transition into schools and some perspective taking. So IEPs, why bother talking about them? Here's a quote from a local Metro Van school district administrator who I work with, who has a master's degree in special ed and extensive special education classroom autism and IEP experience. She said, individual education plans are simply not well written. The goals are too vague to be useful, so all of this energy and time is spent meeting and writing them in September and October, or even November and December, and then they just get filed away and people forget about them until we meet again in June. And then when we do meet to review it, there's absolutely no data to tell us if we've achieved anything. We resort to anecdotes, as if this is good enough. It's very frustrating, and the cycle continues again next school year. So this was written by a school district employee, and she gave me permission to share this. How many of you, by show of hands, does this seem familiar? A lot of hands. Yeah, so this is one of the problems. This is part of our professional humility, and that philosophic doubt is to recognize this is happening. Maybe not with my students and in my practice all the time, but I know this is happening, and it could creep into my practice for my students, so we want to guard against this. Right? This is why IEP is important to talk about. The IEP, this is the document that should identify the excesses and deficits that will be addressed through instruction. The document that should clearly describe the teacher and EA behaviors, those antecedents and consequences that they control in the Learn unit that will result in skill acquisition. And the document that should provide accountability through measurement. And this isn't my opinion. This is the Ministry of Education of British Columbia in their formal documentation. So you're going to see citations on a number of slides. BCM, Ministry of Ed, 2009. I've taken a bunch of content directly from their 90-plus page guidelines on how to do IEPs, right? The recommendations from our Ministry of Education. The big idea, an IEP is a documented plan developed for a student with special needs that summarizes and records the individualization of a student's education program. Core elements of an IEP. The student's present level, baseline in other words, measurable goals and objectives, both short-term and long-term, research-based instructional tactics provided to the student, meaning what will the staff do to bring about the learning, and how progress will be measured and when periodic reporting will occur. Right? Periodic, not once a year. I'll come back to that later. These core elements should be present regardless of the individual school or district, regardless of the templates or software the school district uses, regardless of the variability in teaching staff or the individual needs of the student. So it's basically saying there can't be exceptions. Well, but we can't do that. These are the core elements that should be there, right? And really, we can't accept excuses for why they're not there. They might be barriers that need to be solved and overcome, but these are the core elements that need to be in an IEP. Which core elements seem to get the most attention? So thinking of your IEPs, and I'm thinking a lot of the IEPs that I work with in various school districts, the electronic templates they have to use. They will, in the template, have, in many cases, a present level. They will have goals, they will have strategies, and they will have a little area for recording, but not all four of these get equal attention in the actual IEP. To me, there's one of these four required that people tend to focus on. Anyone want to guess which one it is? I don't see that. Do you see that? Maybe in your district they report on that. I tend not to see reporting on that. We're kind of superficial reporting on that. Number two, I'm seeing more number twos go up. I mean, depending on the district, it could be any of these, right? You're saying number four. What I tend to see in the IEPs and school districts I visit is we spend pretty much all of our time talking about number two. Right? We meet to come up with, in some cases, long-term goals, but the short-term goals, we really spend no time talking about measurement. Right? We spend very little time talking about strategies that are going to be meaningful. It's not that these things aren't filled out, it's just that they don't seem to get the bulk of the attention, in my experience. And I recognize a variety of experiences, right? Every school district is different. And schools within school districts are very different. It's not a homogeneous system. There's so much variability. I sometimes get phone calls from people moving to British Columbia. They'll contact me at the university and say, we've got a kid with autism. Can you recommend a good school? So I don't answer that question. I say there's no single good school district or single good school. But what you're probably looking for is where right now is there a group of people who you'd work well with, right? That's what makes a good school, is having a good team year by year, right? The school itself is not neither good nor bad. It's about effective teaming. So I tend to see too much time or almost exclusive time talking about the goals. But if we've got goals without really good strategies for how we're going to achieve them that are accountable, how are we actually going to meet those goals? And quite often at the end of the year when we talk about them, we haven't met those goals. And sometimes it's like, well, we'll just roll that into next year, right? Which is a little defeating because it really shouldn't be that way. So this comes from IDEA, the American legislation, where they actually are ahead of us in that term. IEP goals should include a timeline for meeting objectives that are specific, measurable, observable, easily connected to classroom activities. So you guys have all heard of SMART objectives, I'm sure, right? That acronym to guide you in selecting IEP objectives. Really specific, right? He'll learn better reading. That's not specific. Measurable, he'll become more social. How is that measurable? Achievable, if it's in grade 1 and you're saying he'll learn multiplication. Well, that's not appropriate for grade 1. That's not achievable in the school year. It's not really grade appropriate. Realistic and timely. Timely doesn't get enough attention in all of our IEPs. And I was actually completely oblivious to what the Ministry of Education recommends around time until I prepared for this talk last year. And what I learned, I might be giving it away a little early, is that IEP objectives are not meant to be annual goals. They shouldn't be achieved by the end of June. IEP objectives are meant to be met incrementally and frequently. Your IEP objectives, so you should be setting goals that will be met before Christmas when you meet in September, and then goals that might be met around spring break, and then goals by the end of June. Your goals should be cycling and evolving throughout the school year. Not like we've got these 12 things, we're gonna hopefully get through to the end of June, right? Which tends to be common practice. I've been part of that practice. I recognize that it's happening. We're not either critiquing or defending it, just recognizing that that's happening. So the Ministry of Ed, and so those of you who've worked with me over the last couple of years, you know that I've started to bring this into my recommendations to schools, is that we should have goals for Christmas, and then we should be meeting again and coming up with new goals. Or if a goal is achieved faster, we need to have another impromptu meeting to replace it, right? Because teaching should be dynamic, and it should be rapid. Most of the things that we learn, if you go to a cooking class or something like that, you learn things pretty rapidly. It's not like I want to learn to cook turkey dinner 2 years from now, right? I want to go to a few classes and then cook turkey dinner next month, and then I'm going to have a new goal, right? That should be the case for our students. Recognizing again that we have the autism spectrum, and there are people on the spectrum where this will be happening very rapidly, and there are some people on the autism spectrum where they're not progressing as rapidly, right? And then that won't be the case where it should be every few months, right? There are individual differences, I want to be clear on that. But timely is huge. So how are we doing with IEPs? Well, this is an empirical question, right? We can sit here and anecdotally say, we can be improving our IEPs. We all recognize that because we're altruistic people. We want to do better. But some people have turned this into an empirical question. Let's do some research around it. So research shows that IEPs tend to include inadequate descriptions of present performance at present level. And that's kind of my experience. Goals that are neither specific nor measurable, and in some cases, unrealistic expectations. And so this is empirical reviews of actual IEPs, recognizing that these tend to be some of the faults. And with full humility, I recognize it's in some of my past practice working with on IEP teams that, yeah, we haven't done a good enough job with this. It's not that we haven't been trying, that we're good or intelligent people, but we need to be doing a better job with this. So here's some of the data that Rubel et al. Published in 2010. And there was no correlation between IEP quality and teacher variables, location, or school. So they looked at a variety of teachers in inner city schools, rural schools, rich schools, poor schools, and none of those things actually had any impacted how well the IEPs were done. Can you guys see this? So the student's present level of performance is described for the objective. 68.6% of the time, that was being done. Is that good enough? Think about your minimum standards on most IEPs. There's this magic number, 80%. Right? It's not meeting our standard for what we usually use on IEPs. And that's the best statistic up here. So this was over 2 states and a variety of schools in the United States. The goal or objective is able to be measured in behavioral terms, 41%. So 60% improvement needed there. Conditions under which the behavior is to occur are provided, right? Those clear antecedents, part of the learn unit, 39%. The student's performance of this objective is described in a manner which links to the general curriculum or developmental curriculum, 37.2%, and that's actually mandated by IDEA legislation, that's why they have it. Specially designed instruction is individualized to the goal or objective, 2.9%. when it comes to good strategies. Method of goal measurement is described, 1.9%. And this is under IDEA legislation, which is pretty rigorous. They should be higher. A criteria and timeline for goal attainment is described specifically for objectives, other than for lengths of the IEP, that being the school year, 0%. Right? So that's one empirical analysis showing that these folks need to be doing better. And if we kind of generalize that to our practices, you're probably seeing some of these where, yeah, with full humility, I think that we need to improve some of these things as well. And poor IEPs have some problems. So disputes arising from IEPs for students with ASD are the fastest growing and most expensive area of educational lawsuits in the United States of litigation. 500% increase in the number of IEPs for students with ASD from 1995 through 2005. Well, that kind of corresponds with the increase in prevalence rates. We're seeing this explosion of students with autism. There will be the need for IEPs, and now the new statistic coming out of this is those students are leaving high school and going into adult services, and the explosion of need for adult services is in the double-digit hundreds of percent. This can be very costly for schools. I have some colleagues in the United States who work in charter schools where they provide intensive intervention for kids with autism, 40 hours a week, and the average tuition range for these schools is $60,000 to $90,000 a year, American. And if you ask, how do they afford that? How can the parents afford this? None of the parents are paying for it. All of the parents have sued their school district to say, you're not meeting your IEP obligations, so we're going to take our student to the special program and you have to pay for it. And it's cheaper for the school districts to cough up 90 grand than to fight it in court. And so you can see the explosion in costs and the outcome of these schools not delivering what the parents are looking for. Common concerns from parents that were described by Fisher and Mayer in 2002, being viewed as equals in making educational decisions. Right, we'll talk a bit as we go on about collaboration. And so this is coming from a research article. Parents want to be more involved. They want to feel like they're a part of the team. IEP objectives being followed in the classroom. You know, I sit in this meeting and I agree to these goals, and then I really don't know day by day what is happening in the classroom. When people come work with my kid at home, or if I take them to speech therapy, I can watch and I can see, but I really don't know what's happening in the classroom. And that's a concern. And I think that's something that's understandable, and it's something that we can address, right? That's not insurmountable. Being fully informed of special education laws and their rights. I've been to a few schools where actually, especially in kindergarten, the schools has designed a welcome to your IEP document to orient the kindergarten parents on what to expect and what their rights are, which is a really nice altruistic move on the part of the school to provide this as an educational resource to the parents. Classroom practices such as ineffective discipline programs, inappropriate placement decisions, and support ratio coverage. So those would be ineffective discipline program might be a student with autism with no communication hits a peer and they get suspended for a week because that's what we do to kids who hit. Well, the intent of that punishment procedure is that for the typical student who experienced that, they won't hit again. But for a student with autism, that's probably a completely ineffective contingency. And as soon as he comes back to school, he'll hit again. So that business as usual discipline strategy is completely inappropriate for the student who doesn't understand it, right? Inappropriate placement decisions, kids being put in a special education program when the parent would rather they were in an integrated setting or vice versa. And then the amount of SEA coverage. Right? These are parent concerns that come from the research.